Hey beloved, welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, welcome for the first time. Today I'm going to be sharing a word that the Lord gave me Saturday morning as I was doing Saturday morning prayer for my local church, New Covenant Tabernacle. And so it's out of Luke, and it's really about where we are right now and what we're headed into. So it's prophetic in nature, and it kind of is giving us something, some things to grasp and make sense of in this season. And it is the new wineskin that is forming. I believe that the Lord is preparing a new wineskin. And so the scripture that I'm going to be reading out of today is Luke chapter 5, and it's the parable about fasting. But he begins to talk about a new wineskin. And so before I get into this teaching, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, to like this video and share it with others if it blesses you, and leave a comment and let me know how this word helped you, and if you have any questions. Okay, starting to read Luke 5 verse 33. And so they asked him, Jesus, saying, why do the disciples of John fast and make prayers, and likewise those of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink? And he said to them, can you make friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and they will fast in those days. Then he spoke a parable to them and said, no one puts a piece from a new garment on an old one. Otherwise, the new makes a tear, and also the piece that was taken out of the new one does not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine will burst the new wineskins and be spilled, and the wineskins will be ruined. But the new wine must be put into new wineskins, and both are preserved. And no one, having drunk old wine, immediately desires new, for he says, the old is better. Okay, and so when the Lord gave me this word Saturday, he told me to take my Bible, because lots of times I use my phone to share scriptures, and so I knew that he wanted to say something, so I brought my Bible and I laid it out as I began to lead prayer. And he said wineskin, and he took me to these verses, and also the parable in Matthew that includes counting the cost of going to battle. But what I want to share is that the Lord said, think it not strange, beloved, that everything looks different. He is forming a new wineskin. There is a harvest that is coming, and it's going to take a new type of church. And so there's a revival that is needed and necessary in the church right now. And so it is going to form the new wineskin. So it's not just a revival for us to return to the Lord, but to receive new instructions, new orders, to re-enlist, as it were, to go out and be those laborers for the harvest. The harvest that is coming is not a harvest of people that look like the last generation, or that were maybe like you and I, whoever I'm speaking to, that when we got saved and what it took for us. So it's a new generation with lots of new temptations and things of the world. And so we have to go in a different way. Many of these people may not be willing to come to church. And matter of fact, now the church is closed in many ways, and we don't know exactly when it will be fully opened or ever be like it was. And so God is using the things that look evil, the things that the world may have meant for evil, or the devil meant for evil, to work for our good. And it reminds me of the story of Joseph. He was told by God gave him a dream that he was going to, his brothers were going to bow down to him, and his father and his mother, and he didn't really understand what that meant. And then he got sold into Egypt by his brothers because they were jealous of him because he was his father's favorite. And then he had this dream that showed the favor of God also on his life. And when he got there, he went into Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife accused him of something, and he went to prison. And the favor of God was on his life in Potiphar's house, and it was on his life in the prison. The captain of the guard then still asked Joseph to put everything that was in his hand in Joseph's hand. And it would be time before the butler and the baker went, and he interpreted their dreams. You guys know the story, most of you. And then after he interpreted the dreams, they still forgot about him, the butler, because the baker was hung. But after he came out then, and his brothers came, and everything came to pass with the 7 years of plenty, and then the 7 years of famine, which led his children, his brothers, back into, led them into Egypt, whereas the Lord had spoken to Abraham before he passed away and said, of a surety, I am going to send your children into a foreign country. He didn't tell them where. Tell him where, and they're going to be there for 400 years, and they're going to be oppressed, but while they're there, I'm going to multiply them. So he had no idea that he was part of God's plan to bring his purpose to pass, to create the children, the nation of Israel, as he had promised Abraham. And so here he was playing his part. God didn't tell him everything. He gave him a vision and a dream and told him, this is what I'm going to do. And so he gave him something to stake his faith in, but he didn't give him all the details. He had to trust God. He had to endure with a good attitude and keep his principles about him, keep his faith in God intact, and continue to serve in the place he was in until God brought about this promise. And so when God is planning something, the counsel of heaven that is not always revealed to us, he says there's going to be a revival. He says that their harvest is coming. We've heard that. If you haven't heard that from different prophets, no matter what denomination you are from, we all know that there's a harvest in this generation that is being lost, but God doesn't want it to be a post-Christian world, even though it is. There's a harvest. The only way that we can flip that, as it's happened time and again, we've seen it in the dark ages in different stages and generations, that there has to be a revival. And then from that revival, God pouring into his people, then they can go out and pour out into people and be his hands, feet, mouthpieces, eyes, ears to see what he sees and hear him and do what he commands them to do, so that souls that look too far gone, that look lost, can be saved. And so let's go back to the new wineskin. So he says you cannot pour new wine into old wineskins or the wine will burst. So God is creating in us through all these things, technical difficulties, transition, not being able to meet like we used to be. Where is this young generation? This young generation is on the internet. They stay on social media. They're out there. They're not in the church, and many of them would not come in the church, but they may entertain an online service. They may be out at those places where they are protesting. So that's what they do. So God is teaching his church and building our capacity. That's the new wineskin. An old wineskin has been stretched, but I believe it's like the alcohol level or whatever it is in wine that will burst an old wineskin. So the newer wineskin, and it will tear. So the newer wineskin has more room to stretch. It has not been stretched to capacity yet, and so but it has formed and it's tight. And so then when you pour new wine into it, they can stretch and grow together. And he made this out of the garment as well. He talked about that. And so why am I saying that? Because just like with Joseph, God was preparing something. And so in this time of this pandemic and the time of racial tensions and everything that's going on that seems out of sync and out of order, when we heard all these wonderful prophecies about 2020 going into this year and all the great things that are going to happen going into this year, and then bam, everything happens and here we are. God is doing something different. He doesn't always tell us how he's going to do it, but he's a keeper of his word. So he said he was going to judge the systems of the world, financial systems and all kinds of other systems of the world, not just in this nation, but the nations around the world. And God is doing that. He's judging the systems of the world, but he also said he had a plan for his church. And so as we are having to shift, just like Joseph, he continued to serve. He was able to change with the times. He was able to be flexible, and instead of complaining and getting in a rut, he made the best of where he was at until God fulfilled his word. Jesus says here that, and no one having drunk old wine immediately desires new, for he says the old is better. So a lot of the church is complaining, and if they're not complaining, they're just frustrated, and understandably so. People are frustrated, the church is frustrated, and the world is frustrated in general, because things are different, right? Things have changed, and they're not what they used to be, and we're having to do things differently. And then as soon as we think we have it down, there's another change, there's another shutdown. And so nobody wants to indulge this new wine, because the old was better. But God is saying it is a new wine that I am preparing. So we have to prepare ourselves for the new wineskin. And I believe that the new wine is going to be like the revival that is coming as we prepare, as we stretch our capacity, as we willingly pivot and see God in what is going on, and cry out to him in prayer and fasting to make us ready for the harvest, to prepare our hearts. Then a revival is going to come to the church in these coming days. Revival is coming to the church, and in that revival, it's going to form a new wineskin. So in the natural, we're having to do things differently. But when we shift our mindsets and we begin to seek the Lord in this time for not only how to do things differently and how to take back our rights as a church, as some feel are being threatened, and it is true. And so, but to use this time to go deeper, to dig deeper in prayer and fasting, and get the wisdom of God, get the plan of God, get the strategies of God, get the heart of God, get the presence of God back. Not just church as usual and our program and our worship, but going deeper and seeking God deeper. Then he's going to bring that revival that is needed and necessary to the church, so that we can be the new wineskin, not the old, that he can pour in. He can pour into, so that we can give out. And even now, the new wineskin is being formed in the way we're having to do things different. And let me rephrase that. The new wine will be that which he pours in when we willingly let him shape us and mold us again. He's the potter and we are the clay. And then when we get that new wine in us, the new way that he's doing things, like he was telling them here, he was going to go away, and there was coming a new wine. There was coming a new way of doing things, because he was going to go away to the Father, and the Holy Spirit was going to come, and it was their church was going to be birthed. It wasn't only going to be the children of Israel, the Jew and Gentile, but he was bringing one new man. He was bringing a different way of worshiping and interacting even with the Father. Those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And so we've done things a certain way, and we've gotten used to that. And here he is with the paradigm shift, and he's saying, you're going to have to shift. And if I would have left it to yourself, you wouldn't have done it. And so God is playing chess. It's like a game of chess where the enemy thinks he's done something, just like had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But God is strategic, just like he was strategic when he brought other things to pass. So God normally does not work through miracles. He can, and he does do signs and wonders, but words regarding his promises and his purposes, he works through time and circumstance. So he creates circumstance, and then he creates these kairos moments that come about on our chronos calendar, so appointed times of the Lord, or set times. So he creates these times with him that then he can come in and And we're looking at the chronos, the calendar, our calendar. And God is creating set times or appointed times for him to do certain things and to fulfill certain things on his calendar, his eternal calendar, so that he can fulfill his plans. And so don't look at it as what's going on as just what the world is doing, but see what God is doing. And yes, it's frustrating. Yes, Joseph was really in prison. The people were really in Israel, in Egypt for 400 years. So it's not denying the reality. It is trusting and believing God that he's going to do what he said he's going to do, and finding your part in that plan. And in our part right now is to seek God in prayer and fasting and cry out for revival and be that revival, and let Jesus be a revival to him, to return to us, to return to our first love, so that he can fill us again, not just for us, not just for what we need, so that we would have the boldness, that we would have the wisdom, the courage, the power, and the presence of God to go out and reach a lost generation. It's not going to happen by inviting them to church. And there's not going to be the power to change certain people without a word from God, without a prayer that is filled with power. People come in and they fill churches and they fill the altars and they struggle. But when a person is born again, because they have experienced the tangible presence of God or the power of God, they are born again and they are forever changed, and their hearts are turned toward God. They're snatched out of the kingdom of darkness and translated into the kingdom of his dear Son of love, Jesus Christ. And so this is what God wants to do. There's no other way to meet this moment when we are in a post-Christian generation, that we have to, our post-Christianity generation, same thing, when we have to bring the revival. When something needs to be revived, that means it is dead. That means the church has lost her power for the most part in a whole, at least in the United States and many of the Western countries. So in our world, in our society, the people, this whole generation is going a different way and turning from God if we measure side by side. So yeah, there are people who are saved. Yes, there are people who are still getting saved, and young people who are still going to church. But more of them are going to hell. More of them are stuck in the world and don't want to hear about Jesus. More of them are turning to New Age and different things of that nature. And so God is saying there has to be a new wineskin. The old will not do, because I have to pour in something new so that you can pour it out to a generation in a way that they can receive it. And so a lot of the generals have gone on to be with the Lord, and God is bringing in new people. And even for the older people and the older generation, God is going to do something in them if they will seek him and not reject the wine. Immediately they say they don't like the new wine because the old is better. We don't like what's going on. Bring us back to our comfortable church where we can just meet without a problem and all that. And there's resistance. And it's quite understandable. And we should resist when something is going wrong and our rights are being tampered with. But we have to see what God is doing in it. And so when God is doing something, it's to seek him. We can fight on the surface, or we can go deeper in the spirit and seek God for revival and let him reshape the way that we do church, the way that we interact, the way that we see church, the way that we understand church, that it had to be in a building, and that we would take it out and we would take it in the airways and in the highways and the byways, and we wouldn't be afraid of that. And we might even do it so good and so well that we don't go back to the old, but we embrace the new. Not as our rights were taken from us, but as we took what was given and made something beautiful and better out of it, so that we could reach more people, so that we can reach the lost. So I don't have all the answers of how that looks none of us do right now. But we do know that as we seek the Lord, that he's going to show us how to use this new thing that we have been forced, as it were, into, to develop a wineskin that can hold the new wine. So I hope this bless you. God bless you. Until next time, Sister Krista Pettiford. And please subscribe, share, and like, and leave me a comment if this word blessed you. God bless.